Story number 1. I was never the type to have my food delivered to me. I loved going out into the world, seeing fresh new faces, window shopping, and being able to touch, see, and smell what I'm buying. However, you could say I had no choice in the matter when I finally decided to start having my food delivered to my house. The first few times went well. I had my weekly groceries delivered to my doorstep. I never opened the door for the delivery man, though. You could say I don't trust people. I never wanted to open my home to someone I didn't know. So I always left instructions for my food to be left on the doorstep, and I would get them once the delivery man was gone. One day, I was working at home and waiting for a delivery to arrive. I had run out of cereal, milk, and a few other things. It was early in the morning, but there were still a few delivery men in my area working at the time. I received a notification that the delivery was on the way, and I made sure to add a note stating that the food be left on my doorstep. I continued with my work. I was expecting to hear the doorbell ring, followed quickly by the sound of a car engine driving away. I heard the doorbell ring just as a notification appeared on my phone, letting me know that my delivery had arrived. This was expected. What I wasn't expecting was a hard knocking at the door. I put my laptop down and tiptoed over to the window beside my front door. I slowly pulled the curtains aside and peered out. There was a man holding a large brown bag, which I can only assume was my food, in his hands. He paced in front of my door, and there was an angry look on his face. I flinched and jumped back when he banged on the door again. After a few seconds, he pressed on the doorbell and held it. The uninterrupted ringing filled my house. I didn't know what was happening. None of the other delivery men had done anything like this before. I didn't want to open the door, but at the same time he had my food, and it didn't look like he was leaving anytime soon. He glanced my way, and I practically fell backwards to get away from his eyes. I stayed crouched on the floor below the window. It was quiet for a long time. Suddenly, the knocking started up again, but this time it was on the window I was just looking out of. I shouted at him to go away. At the time I wasn't thinking, and I should have kept quiet. The knocking stopped, and he responded with a soft laugh. That laughter chilled my blood. I'd never felt so scared before in my life. I ran around the house, locking all the doors and closing all the windows. I think I sat in the dark for hours after that. At some point, the man left. I'm not sure when. I unlocked the door a few hours later to find my food left by the front door. Let's just say I'll be getting my food directly from the store from now on. Story number 2. Sweaty Palms. It was late one night and I had some friends over. We were already drunk and yet we carried on drinking. We had no plans on going out, but we were all dressed up as if we were. Sometimes you've just got the feeling to put some makeup on, wear your best dress, and dance around your own house. When you get drunk, you also get hungry. I live in a pretty secluded area. There's nothing nearby, and neither I nor my friends were in any state to be driving somewhere. So we decided to have food delivered. In this day and age, having food delivered to your house or practically anywhere is the easiest thing in the world. I wanted pizza, one of my friends wanted sushi, and another one was craving a cheese and chicken burger. Maybe it's just because we were all drunk at the time, but we all found it pretty amazing that we could get all of those things delivered to us. The notification on my phone went off and I heard the car hooter outside my house. My friends urged me to go out and fetch our food. I was a little annoyed by the fact that the delivery man was staying in his car and not bringing the food to my house. I was far too hungry and far too drunk to care all that much. I ran out, barely able to stand up straight, and met the guy at his car. He opened the passenger side window and smiled at me from the driver's seat. He eyed me when I reached the car. There was a look in his eye that I didn't notice at first. I asked him about the food and he pointed to the large box resting on the passenger seat. Now, I realize how stupid I was, but not when I did it. I leaned through the car's window and reached for the food. As my arm stretched out, the man's hand shot towards me and grabbed hold of my wrist. His knuckles turned white as his grip around my wrist tightened. I didn't react at first. I wasn't sure how to react. I felt his sweat sink into my pores and his nails dug into my skin. It made me sick. I pulled away from him, but he wouldn't let me go. He held on tight and my heart raced in my chest. It felt like I was stuck in that position for hours. I could hear him talking to me. He was complimenting me and saying all sorts of things. His voice was muffled. The only thing I could hear was my heart beating and the blood rushing to my head. My legs felt weak. I don't know why I didn't cry out for help. All that alcohol was hitting me harder than I expected, and my empty stomach suddenly felt much too full. Eventually, I managed to pull myself loose of his grip. I ran back to the house and locked the door. It took a while before my friends were able to get me to tell them what happened. By that point, the guy had already driven off, and there wasn't much we could do other than complain to the delivery service. I sobered up quickly that night, but I was still hungry and even angrier after I fully realized what had happened to me that night. Story number 3. Unblinking Eyes. I'm a delivery man, and I've worked for several restaurants and stores over the years. Lately, I started working for a delivery app. I won't say which one for obvious reasons, but let's just say it's one of the big ones. Anyway, since I've been delivering all sorts of things for years now, you can bet that I've got some good stories to tell, but none of them are as disturbing as this one. I got a call to deliver some food to a house on the edge of the city. I picked up the package from the store and followed the app to the destination. I've delivered to far out places before, so there wasn't anything strange about it. I'll probably lose my job for saying this, but sometimes I like to go through the customer's packages while on my way to the destination. I try to figure out what their life is like by judging what's in their package. This package was strange. It was filled with canned food, both for humans and for cats. The only thing I understood after going through it was why it was so heavy. I arrived at the house that my directions led me to. It was properly in the middle of nowhere. I carried the bag down the dusty dirt road and towards the creaking, old shack. I felt like I was being watched the entire time. The delivery didn't have any notes about the package, so I would usually just knock on the door. If there's no answer, I leave the package by the door and go. So I walked towards the front door of the shack and planned on doing exactly that. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes staring at me. I knocked on the door and waited for a while, but there was no answer. I shrugged it off and carefully placed the package on the floor. I usually like to hide packages. I know what it feels like to have a package stolen by a nosy neighbor or passerby. While I was searching for a good enough hiding spot, that feeling of being watched got worse. I could even feel someone breathing down my back. I might be overreacting, but that's what it felt like. I dropped the package behind some empty plant pot. When I stood back up, I was facing a small window on the left side of the door. It was only for a second, but as I stood up, my eyes met another pair of eyes. They stared straight at me, and I knew they were the eyes that had been watching me the whole time. They were wide and unblinking, and they just stared at me. I felt the blood in my veins run cold. There was just something about those eyes and the way they stared at me, almost as if there was nothing behind them. I got out of there as fast as I could, and I never looked back. It may seem like a mild story compared to most. I can't explain the look in those eyes and how much fear they put into me. I wouldn't go back there for anything. Story number 4. A Threat. I was home alone one weekend, since my husband had been called to work for a sudden emergency. He works construction, so I guess any emergency at a construction site is a pretty big deal. Anyway, we had our own plans for the weekend, and before he left, I had already ordered some pizza and drinks for us. I won't say which app I used, for the sake of not wanting to get into any legal battles or anything like that. I figured I'd just keep the pizza in the oven and the drinks in the fridge till my husband got back and we could continue our plans for the weekend. We live in a weird cul-de-sac, and sometimes people have trouble finding our house. So, when the app told me that my driver was close, I went outside my house and stood on the street. I only waited for about 5 minutes before I spotted the scooter driving down the road. It was all pretty normal at first. I waved to the guy, and when he spotted me, he turned on his indicator and pulled into the side of the road. He stopped right in front of me and took off his helmet. As he looked at me, the look on his face changed. A smile spread across his face, and there was a glint in his eyes. He passed the box with my pizza over to me. I felt his hand caress against mine and linger. At the same time, a sickening, smug smile pulled at the corner of his lips, almost as if he was holding back laughter. In that moment, he leaned in close to me and whispered the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my ear. He said, "I might come back here later. You should leave the door unlocked." I felt sick to my stomach. The chills running up and down my body felt like millions of tiny insects crawling beneath my skin. He leaned away and winked at me. The satisfied smile on his face was in response to the look of absolute terror on mine. I wanted to run away, but for some reason I was stuck in that spot. The concrete sidewalk had leaped up and swallowed my feet whole, trapping me in that position with that man. He chuckled to himself as he climbed back on his scooter and put his helmet on. I watched helpless, still stuck to the sidewalk, as he turned around and drove down the road. At some point, I snapped out of it and ran back inside. I called my husband and demanded he come home. If that man had any intention of coming back to my house, I didn't want to be alone. We put so much trust in delivery drivers and apps. That trust was broken for me, and I don't think I'll ever get it back. Story number 5. Wrong house. This happened to me a few years ago when I was a senior in high school. I don't like talking about it, but with food delivery becoming such a big thing since the pandemic, I feel like I should warn people about the dangers of letting a complete stranger handle your food. It was the weekend. My big brother and I weren't exactly social butterflies. Our weekends mainly consisted of staying inside and playing video games or vegging in front of the TV. My parents were the type to go out on date nights at least once a month. That weekend was their date night. So we had the house to ourselves. That didn't change our plans all that much. The only difference was we put the volume a little higher while we played our games. This one night, we had someone knock on our door. We weren't allowed to have company over while our parents weren't there, not that we were even expecting anyone. I answered, and it was a pizza delivery guy. I won't say for which restaurant. Anyway, he handed me the pizza, but I refused. We hadn't ordered a pizza. The delivery man insisted and stated that it was already paid for, and the instructions led him directly to my house. I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. After all, our plan for dinner was to heat up some old mac and cheese sitting at the back of the fridge. I took the pizza and I even gave the guy a tip. A small price to pay for free dinner. My brother was just as surprised as I was. We left the pizza on the table in the living room and went to the kitchen to get some plates and something to drink. When we got back, the pizza was lying on the floor with a big chunk taken out of it. We have a dog, but he's usually well behaved. I guessed that my parents hadn't fed him before they left. My brother attempted to clean up the pizza while I went looking for our dog. I didn't want to blame him, but my parents would insist on disciplining him somehow. When I found him, he was spread out on the floor and he seemed to be breathing really heavily. I walked around to where I could see his face and noticed that he'd thrown up all over the floor. His mouth was hanging open and he looked really ill. I screamed for my brother since he was the oldest. I was around 16 at the time and I had no idea what to do. Thankfully, my brother shot straight into action. He called the emergency vet number and then he called my parents. Both arrived at the house around the same time. We told the vet about the pizza, but he said it wouldn't have caused such an extreme reaction alone. The vet told us that our dog had been poisoned. That was when we got the police involved. After some testing, they found that our pizza had been laced with all manner of drugs, enough to cause an overdose. Let me just say that our dog was okay. He got his stomach pumped and he survived. If my brother and I had eaten that pizza, we probably would have died. Obviously, the police investigated the pizza place, but they didn't have a delivery from my area scheduled, and the delivery man I described wasn't even an employee of theirs. It's amazing how many monsters are out there. It makes me sick to think that I actually gave the guy a tip for trying to kill us.